Sophie Helen Rhys-Jones was born on January 20th, 1965, in Oxford, England, into a middle-class family that valued hard work, education, and kindness above all else. Her father, Christopher Rhys-Jones, worked as a tire salesman, while her mother, Mary, was a secretary. They lived in a modest home in Homestead Road, where Sophie spent her early childhood surrounded by love, laughter, and the simple pleasures of family life. The Rhys-Jones household was far from glamorous, but it was rich in warmth and values that would shape Sophie into the remarkable woman she would become. She wasn't the most academic student, but she had something far more valuable, an innate ability to understand and connect with people's emotions and needs. Sophie's childhood was filled with ordinary moments that would later seem extraordinary in their simplicity. Family holidays were spent camping in the English countryside or visiting relatives. She learned to appreciate nature, finding joy in long walks through forests and meadows. These experiences taught her to find beauty in simple things, a quality that would later endear her to the British public who saw her as refreshingly down-to-earth. When Sophie was 7 years old, the family moved to Brinchley, a small village in Kent. This move proved to be transformative for young Sophie. The village community was tight-knit, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Here, Sophie learned the importance of community spirit and helping neighbors in times of need. She would often accompany her mother when delivering meals to elderly residents or helping with village events. At Kent College, a boarding school in Pembury, Sophie continued to develop her people skills. She wasn't particularly interested in sports or academic achievements, but she excelled in activities that involved working with others. She joined the drama club, not because she wanted to be an actress, but because she enjoyed the collaborative process of creating something beautiful with a team. Sophie's teenage years were marked by a growing awareness of social issues. She became involved in charity work through her school, organizing fundraising events for various causes. Her teachers noted that she had a natural gift for bringing people together for a common purpose. She could convince even the most reluctant students to participate in charity drives or community projects. After finishing school, Sophie decided to pursue a career in public relations. This choice reflected her understanding of her own strengths. She was excellent at communication, had a natural warmth that put people at ease, and possessed an intuitive understanding of what would appeal to different audiences. She moved to London in the mid-1980s to begin her career, sharing a small flat with friends and embracing the independence of adult life. Sophie's first job was with a small PR firm where she worked on various accounts, from local businesses to emerging brands. Her colleagues remember her as someone who always went the extra mile for clients, not because she was trying to impress her bosses, but because she genuinely cared about helping people succeed. She had a talent for understanding what clients really needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. In the late 1980s, Sophie joined a larger PR company where she began working on more high-profile accounts. She developed campaigns for fashion brands, restaurants, and entertainment companies. Her approach was always personal. She believed that successful PR wasn't about creating artificial hype, but about telling authentic stories that would resonate with real people. It was during this period that Sophie began to move in circles where she might encounter members of the royal family. London's PR world was small and interconnected, and successful professionals often found themselves at the same events, parties, and networking gatherings. Sophie attended these events not as a social climber, but as a professional who understood that building relationships was an essential part of her job. Sophie's reputation in the PR world was growing. Clients appreciated her honest approach and her ability to see the bigger picture. She wasn't interested in short-term publicity stunts that might damage a client's reputation in the long run. Instead, she focused on building sustainable, positive relationships between her clients and the public. This thoughtful approach would later serve her well in royal life, where every public appearance and statement was scrutinized by the media. In 1993, Sophie's life took an unexpected turn when she was working on a PR project that brought her into contact with Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II. The meeting happened at a tennis event where Sophie was managing publicity for one of the sponsors. Edward was there in his official capacity, representing various charities he supported. Their first conversation was entirely professional, but both later admitted that they felt an immediate connection. Edward was impressed by Sophie's professionalism and her genuine interest in the charitable causes being supported at the event. Sophie found Edward to be more down-to-earth and approachable than she had expected from a member of the royal family. What followed was a courtship that was refreshingly normal by royal standards. Edward and Sophie dated like any other couple in their 30s. They went to restaurants, attended theater performances, and spent quiet evenings together talking about their hopes and dreams. Sophie continued working throughout their relationship, maintaining her independence and her commitment to her career. The media attention that came with dating a prince was initially overwhelming for Sophie. She had worked in PR long enough to understand how the media operated, but being on the receiving end of such intense scrutiny was entirely different. Photographers followed her to work, reporters called her friends and family for comments, and every outfit she wore was analyzed and criticized. Despite the pressure, Sophie handled the media attention with remarkable grace. She refused to sell her story to tabloids or capitalize on her relationship for personal gain. She continued working in PR while slowly taking on more royal responsibilities. This balance allowed her to maintain her identity while adapting to the demands of royal life. She never tried to completely reinvent herself, instead bringing her authentic personality and professional skills to her new role. The engagement announcement came in January 1999 after Edward had asked both Sophie's parents and the Queen for their blessing. The proposal was private and romantic, taking place at the Bagshot Park estate that would become their family home. Sophie's engagement ring was a stunning piece featuring a 2-carat oval diamond surrounded by heart-shaped gems, designed specifically for her by Edward with input from royal jewelers. The engagement interview revealed a couple genuinely in love and excited about their future together. Sophie spoke about her hopes for using her new position to support causes she cared about, particularly those related to women's issues and disability rights. Edward talked about how Sophie had brought new perspective to his life and helped him understand how to connect more effectively with the public. Planning the royal wedding was a complex undertaking that required balancing tradition with the couple's desire for a celebration that reflected their personalities. Sophie was involved in every detail, from the guest list to the menu, working with palace staff to create an event that would be both properly royal and genuinely personal. The wedding dress, designed by Samantha Shaw, reflected Sophie's sophisticated but understated style. The flowing silk organza gown featured intricate beadwork and a dramatic train, but the overall effect was elegant rather than ostentatious. Sophie chose to wear the Anthem Mayon tiara, a piece from the royal collection that had historical significance but wasn't overly elaborate. Throughout the engagement period, Sophie continued to impress royal watchers with her steady, thoughtful approach to her new role. She took lessons in royal protocol, studied the history of the institutions she would be supporting, and gradually increased her public appearances. Her confidence grew with each engagement, and it became clear that she was developing into a valuable member of the royal family. The wedding day, June 19, 1999, dawned bright and clear. St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle was filled with family, friends, and dignitaries from around the world. As Sophie walked down the aisle toward Edward, observers noted her calm confidence and radiant happiness. The ceremony was beautiful, but not overly formal, reflecting the couple's desire for an event that felt personal despite its public nature. When Sophie became the Countess of Wessex, she was taking on a role that had been vacant for decades. There were no recent precedents for how she should approach her duties, which gave her unusual freedom to shape the position according to her own interests and abilities. She embraced this opportunity, working with palace advisors to identify causes and organizations where she could make a meaningful difference. Sophie's early years as a royal were marked by careful observation and learning. She attended dozens of events, meeting with charity leaders, government officials, and ordinary citizens to understand the issues facing modern Britain. She was particularly drawn to causes related to women's empowerment, disability rights, and supporting military families, areas where her personal interests aligned with significant social needs. The new Countess of Wessex brought a fresh perspective to royal duties. Her background in public relations meant she understood the importance of authentic communication and genuine engagement. She wasn't interested in simply cutting ribbons and making brief appearances. She wanted to develop real relationships with the organization she supported and make a lasting impact on the causes she championed. As Sophie settled into royal life, it became clear that she was going to be a different kind of royal family member. She maintained her own identity while embracing her new responsibilities, bringing warmth, intelligence, and genuine compassion to everything she did. The young woman who had grown up in a modest home in Kent was ready to serve her adopted country with the same values her parents had taught her decades earlier. The early 2000s marked a period of significant growth and development for Sophie as she found her footing in the complex world of royal duties. Unlike other members of the royal family who had been born into their roles, Sophie had to learn everything from scratch while under constant public scrutiny. Her approach was methodical and thoughtful, taking time to understand each organization she worked with before making commitments. Sophie's first major patronage was the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, a cause close to her heart due to her own experiences working with young people during her school years. She didn't simply lend her name to the organization. She spent months learning about child protection issues, meeting with social workers, and visiting facilities that worked with vulnerable children. Her genuine interest and willingness to engage with difficult topics impressed charity workers who had worked with other high-profile patrons. One of Sophie's early royal tours took her to Northern Ireland, where she was tasked with visiting communities still healing from decades of conflict. Palace advisors were nervous about sending a relatively new royal to such a sensitive region, but Sophie's natural warmth and genuine interest in people's stories made the visit a remarkable success. She spent time in both Protestant and Catholic communities, listening to residents talk about their hopes for the future and their ongoing challenges. During her visit to a community center in Belfast, Sophie met with a group of women who had lost family members during the Troubles. Instead of offering platitudes or rushing through the meeting, she sat with them for over an hour, listening to their stories and asking thoughtful questions about their experiences. The women later told reporters that they felt truly heard and understood, something they hadn't experienced from other official visitors. Sophie's approach to royal duties was influenced by her PR background, but not in the way critics might have expected. Rather than focusing on photo opportunities and positive headlines, she used her communication skills to have meaningful conversations with the people she met. She understood that her real job wasn't to look good in photographs, but to use her platform to highlight important issues and support organizations doing crucial work. The birth of Sophie's daughter, Lady Louise, in 2003 added a new dimension to her royal role. Louise was born prematurely with complications that affected her eyesight, requiring immediate medical intervention and ongoing care. This experience gave Sophie first-hand knowledge of what families go through when dealing with medical challenges, and it deepened her commitment to supporting healthcare-related charities. Sophie's handling of her daughter's medical needs revealed her character in ways that impressed both the royal family and the public. She refused special treatment, choosing to use the same National Health Service facilities available to other families. She was often seen in hospital waiting rooms like any other parent, and she spoke openly about the challenges of balancing royal duties with caring for a child with special needs. The experience also influenced Sophie's choice of additional patronages. She became involved with organizations supporting families of children with disabilities, bringing not just her royal status, but also personal understanding to these roles. Parents who met her at charity events noted that she spoke their language. She understood the daily challenges, the worry, and the fierce love that drove their advocacy for their children. In 2007, Sophie's son James was born, completing their family. James, who would later become the Earl of Wessex, was a healthy baby, but Sophie's experience with Louise had already shaped her perspective on parenting and her approach to royal duties. She was determined to give both children as normal a childhood as possible while preparing them for their eventual roles in public life. Sophie's parenting style reflected her own upbringing and values. She insisted that Louise and James understand the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. Both children accompanied their parents to carefully selected public events, where they learned to interact with people from different walks of life. Sophie wanted them to understand that their privileged position came with responsibilities to serve others. As Sophie gained experience and confidence in her royal role, she began to tackle more complex and challenging issues. Her work with organizations supporting sexual assault survivors was particularly notable. This was not a cause that generated positive headlines or comfortable conversations, but Sophie recognized the importance of using her platform to address difficult social problems that affected thousands of women. Working with survivors required Sophie to develop new skills and sensitivities. She underwent training to learn how to interact appropriately with trauma survivors, and she worked closely with professional counselors to understand the best ways to support the organizations doing this work. Her commitment to learning and improving impressed charity workers who had sometimes felt that royal patrons were more interested in the prestige than the actual work. Sophie's international work began to expand during this period as well. She represented the royal family on visits to developing countries, where she focused on issues related to women's empowerment and education. Her trip to South Africa in 2009 was particularly impactful, as she visited projects supporting women entrepreneurs and girls' education in rural communities. During her South African visit, Sophie spent a day with women who had started small businesses with microfinance loans. She sat in their homes, learning about their challenges and successes, and asked detailed questions about how such programs could be expanded. Her genuine interest and practical questions impressed local officials who had hosted many international visitors with less substantive engagement. The trip also included a visit to a school for girls in a township outside Cape Town. Sophie spent the entire day there, attending classes, eating lunch with students, and participating in after-school activities. The students were initially shy around a royal visitor, but Sophie's warm manner and genuine interest in their studies soon had them chatting comfortably about their dreams and ambitions. One particularly moving moment occurred when Sophie met with teenage girls who had faced significant obstacles to continue their education. Many came from families affected by HIV/AIDS, poverty, and other challenges. Sophie listened to their stories with tears in her eyes, and she spoke with them about the importance of education in creating opportunities for the future. The conversation lasted much longer than scheduled, but Sophie refused to cut it short. Back in Britain, Sophie's reputation continued to grow as she took on more challenging assignments. Her work with military families became increasingly important as British forces were deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq. Sophie understood that military spouses and children faced unique challenges, and she was committed to ensuring they received appropriate support. Sophie's visits to military bases were notably different from typical royal engagements. She spent time in family quarters, talking with spouses about their daily challenges while their partners were deployed. She attended school events for military children, understanding that frequent moves and parental deployments created special educational and social needs. Her approach was personal and practical, focusing on how royal support could translate into real assistance for families. One of Sophie's most successful initiatives was her work to establish better support networks for military wives. She recognized that these women often felt isolated, especially during deployments, and she worked with military and charitable organizations to create programs that would help them connect with each other and access resources they needed. The program included regular social gatherings, parenting workshops, and practical support like childcare during military ceremonies and events. Sophie attended many of these gatherings personally, not as a figurehead, but as a participant who listened to concerns and helped problem solve. Military wives appreciated that she seemed genuinely interested in their well-being rather than just fulfilling a royal duty. Sophie's work during this period also included significant involvement in Commonwealth activities. As a member of the royal family representing Britain's relationships with Commonwealth countries, she traveled extensively and developed expertise in international development and diplomacy. Her background and personal style made her particularly effective in these roles. During a visit to Canada, Sophie participated in events celebrating the country's multicultural heritage. She attended a powwow with Indigenous leaders, visited immigrant settlement services in Toronto, and participated in Francophone cultural events in Quebec. Her ability to connect with diverse communities and her genuine interest in learning about different cultures made these visits meaningful rather than ceremonial. The 2008 financial crisis affected many of the charitable organizations Sophie supported, and she adapted her approach accordingly. Understanding that reduced donations meant increased need for royal support, she increased her number of engagements and began participating more directly in fundraising activities. She also used her business background to help organizations think strategically about sustainability during difficult economic times. Sophie's response to the financial crisis demonstrated her practical approach to royal duties. She worked with charity leaders to identify ways that royal support could have maximum impact with limited resources. This included combining events to reduce costs, utilizing royal venues for fundraising activities, and leveraging her media attention to highlight organizations that might otherwise be overlooked. By the end of the decade, Sophie had established herself as a dedicated and effective member of the royal family. Her approach was characterized by genuine engagement, careful preparation, and a focus on making real differences in people's lives rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial obligations. She had found her voice and her area of expertise, and she was ready to take on even greater responsibilities in the years to come. Sophie's transformation from PR professional to working royal was complete, but it had happened in a way that honored both her professional background and her personal values. She had proven that it was possible to maintain authenticity while adapting to the demands of royal life. And she had created a template for meaningful royal service that would influence her work for decades to come. The 2010s brought new challenges and opportunities that would test Sophie's resilience and strengthen her position within the royal family. As other senior royals began to reduce their workloads due to age or changing circumstances, Sophie found herself taking on increased responsibilities at a time when the monarchy needed steady, reliable leadership. The decade began with significant changes in the royal family structure. Prince Philip was gradually reducing his official duties, and other senior royals were focusing their efforts on specific areas. This created opportunities for Sophie to expand her role, but it also meant increased scrutiny and higher expectations for her performance. Sophie embraced these challenges with characteristic determination. Her approach was to build on the foundation she had already established while expanding into new areas where she could make a meaningful difference. She continued her work with children's charities, military families, and international development, but she also began taking on patronages that reflected emerging social needs and changing attitudes. One of Sophie's most significant contributions during this period was her work to combat violence against women. This was not a comfortable or easy cause to champion, but Sophie recognized that her position gave her a unique platform to address issues that were often ignored or stigmatized. Her involvement began with organizations supporting domestic violence survivors, but it expanded to include broader issues of women's safety and equality. Sophie's approach to this work was characteristically thorough. She met with law enforcement officials to understand how cases of violence against women were investigated and prosecuted. She visited refuges and safe houses, talking with survivors about their experiences and the support they needed. She worked with legal experts to understand gaps in the system that allowed perpetrators to escape consequences. Most importantly, Sophie listened to women who had experienced violence firsthand. These conversations were often difficult and emotional, but Sophie understood that her role was to amplify voices that were often silenced or ignored. She used her platform to highlight the prevalence of violence against women and to advocate for better support systems and prevention programs. One particularly impactful visit was to a women's refuge in Manchester, where Sophie spent an entire day talking with residents about their experiences and their hopes for the future. The women were initially hesitant to share their stories with a member of the royal family, but Sophie's genuine warmth and obvious commitment to understanding their situation soon had them speaking openly about their struggles and their determination to rebuild their lives. During the visit, Sophie met Maria, a young mother who had fled an abusive relationship with her two small children. Maria told Sophie about the challenges of starting over with nothing, finding housing and childcare while dealing with trauma, and worrying constantly about her safety and her children's well-being. Sophie listened without interruption, asking thoughtful questions and offering words of encouragement. The conversation with Maria and other women at the refuge profoundly affected Sophie. She realized that these women weren't looking for pity or charity. They wanted safety, opportunity, and respect. They needed practical support to rebuild their lives, and they needed society to understand that domestic violence could affect anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances. Following this visit, Sophie worked with the refuge and similar organizations to develop new programs that addressed the specific needs she had learned about. She helped establish job training programs for survivors, childcare services that understood the unique needs of families affected by violence, and advocacy services that could help women navigate legal and social service systems. Sophie's work in this area required her to develop new skills and sensitivities. She underwent training to learn how to interact appropriately with trauma survivors, and she worked closely with professional counselors and advocates to ensure that her involvement was helpful rather than intrusive. Her commitment to learning and improving impressed professionals who had worked in this field for years. The international dimension of Sophie's work also expanded significantly during this period. She represented the British royal family at numerous overseas events, developing relationships with leaders and organizations around the world. Her focus remained on issues related to women's empowerment, education, and development, but her scope became truly global. A particularly significant trip took Sophie to Bangladesh, where she visited projects supporting women's economic empowerment in rural communities. The trip was physically challenging, requiring travel to remote villages with limited infrastructure, but Sophie was determined to see firsthand how international development programs were affecting women's lives. In one village outside Dhaka, Sophie met with women who had started small businesses with microfinance loans. She sat on the floor of a simple dwelling, learning about their challenges and successes while children played nearby. The women told her about the difficulties of balancing business responsibilities with household duties, the challenges of accessing markets for their products, and their dreams for their children's education. Sophie was particularly impressed by Rashida, a woman who had started a small textile business and used the profits to send her daughter to school. Rashida explained that education for girls was not traditionally valued in her community, but she was determined to give her daughter opportunities that she herself had never had. Sophie spent considerable time talking with Rashida about her business and her hopes for her family's future. The Bangladesh trip also included visits to schools and healthcare facilities supported by British aid programs. Sophie insisted on visiting both successful projects and those facing significant challenges, wanting to understand the full range of experiences rather than seeing only carefully curated success stories. Her questions were practical and detailed, focusing on sustainability and long-term impact. Back home, Sophie's domestic work continued to evolve and expand. She became increasingly involved in issues related to disability rights and inclusion, partly inspired by her experiences as a mother of a child with special needs. Her approach to this work was informed by her personal understanding of the challenges families faced, but she was careful not to position herself as the primary voice for the disability community. Instead, Sophie focused on amplifying the voices of disabled people themselves and the organizations that supported them. She attended conferences and workshops where disabled advocates shared their experiences and expertise. She visited inclusive workplaces and educational settings, learning about best practices for creating environments where everyone could thrive. One of Sophie's most impactful initiatives was her work to promote employment opportunities for disabled people. She recognized that many employers had misconceptions about disability that prevented them from considering qualified candidates, and she used her platform to challenge these assumptions and showcase successful inclusion programs. Sophie visited companies that had made significant commitments to disability inclusion, learning about their hiring practices, workplace accommodations, and the benefits they had experienced from diverse workforces. She also met with disabled employees to hear directly about their experiences and the barriers they had overcome or continue to face. These visits led to Sophie hosting events at royal venues where employers could learn about disability inclusion from experts and successful companies. The events were practical and focused, featuring presentations from HR professionals, disabled employees, and accessibility consultants. Sophie's role was to convene these conversations and lend royal support to the inclusion message. The middle of the decade brought personal challenges that tested Sophie's resilience and deepened her empathy for others facing difficulties. Like many people, she experienced the loss of elderly relatives and watched friends struggle with illness and other hardships. These experiences reminded her that her privileged position didn't insulate her from life's fundamental challenges. Sophie's response to personal difficulties was characteristically private but meaningful. She continued her official duties while dealing with private grief and worry, understanding that her public role required consistency even during difficult times. Her ability to compartmentalize and maintain professionalism while still being authentically human impressed those who worked with her. During this period, Sophie also faced increased media scrutiny as public interest in the younger generation of royals intensified. She handled this attention with the same steady grace she had shown since her engagement, neither courting publicity nor retreating from it. Her focus remained on her work rather than her image, though she understood that maintaining public support was important for the institution she served. Sophie's work with the Commonwealth became increasingly important as the organization faced questions about its relevance and future direction. She participated in Commonwealth conferences and events, working to strengthen relationships between member countries and promote shared values of democracy, human rights, and development. During a Commonwealth conference in Malta, Sophie participated in workshops focused on youth empowerment and gender equality. She worked alongside delegates from dozens of countries, contributing to discussions about how Commonwealth nations could better support young women's education and leadership development. Her contributions were valued because of her extensive experience with these issues rather than simply her royal status. The conference also provided opportunities for Sophie to learn from advocates and leaders from different cultural contexts. She participated in sessions led by women from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, gaining new perspectives on challenges and solutions she had been working on for years. These interactions enriched her understanding and influenced her future approach to international work. As the decade progressed, Sophie's role within the royal family became increasingly significant. She was recognized as one of the hardest-working royals, consistently fulfilling a full schedule of engagements while maintaining high standards for preparation and engagement. Her reliability and competence made her a valuable asset during a period when the monarchy faced various pressures and changes. Sophie's relationship with other members of the royal family also evolved during this period. She developed particularly close working relationships with Princess Anne and Prince Charles, who appreciated her work ethic and practical approach to royal duties. Her ability to work collaboratively while maintaining her own identity and interests made her an effective team member. The end of the decade brought new challenges as the royal family prepared for significant transitions. Prince Philip's retirement from official duties was announced, and questions about the future structure of the working royal family became more pressing. Sophie's proven track record and expanding expertise positioned her as a key figure in the monarchy's future. Throughout all these changes and challenges, Sophie maintained the qualities that had defined her royal service from the beginning: genuine warmth, careful preparation, and a focus on making real differences in people's lives. She had proven that it was possible to adapt and grow while staying true to fundamental values and commitments. By 2019, Sophie had established herself as one of the most respected and effective members of the royal family. Her work touched thousands of lives across multiple continents, and her approach had influenced how other royals thought about service and engagement. She was ready for whatever challenges the next decade might bring, confident in her abilities and clear about her purpose. The 2020s began with unprecedented global challenges that would test every institution, including the British monarchy. Sophie entered this decade as one of the most experienced and trusted members of the royal family, but nothing could have prepared her for the complexity and intensity of the challenges that lay ahead. The COVID-19 pandemic arrived in early 2020, fundamentally changing how the royal family operated and forcing rapid adaptation to new ways of serving the public. Sophie's response to the crisis demonstrated her ability to think creatively and act decisively while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness that had characterized her royal service. When lockdown restrictions made traditional royal engagements impossible, Sophie quickly pivoted to virtual formats. She was among the first royals to embrace video calling technology for official duties, conducting meetings with charity leaders, speaking at online conferences, and maintaining connections with the organizations she supported. Her background in communications proved invaluable as she helped develop new protocols for digital royal engagement. Sophie's first major virtual engagement was with a women's refuge network that was dealing with increased demand during lockdown. Domestic violence incidents had spiked as families were confined together, and refuges were struggling to provide services while maintaining safety protocols. Sophie's video call with refuge workers and survivors highlighted these urgent needs and helped generate public support for increased funding and resources. The technology wasn't perfect. There were occasional connection issues and awkward moments as everyone learned to navigate virtual meetings. But Sophie's warmth and genuine concern transcended the digital barriers. Participants later commented that her engagement felt authentic and meaningful despite the unusual format. Sophie also used the pandemic period to deepen her involvement with healthcare workers and frontline services. She participated in virtual meetings with NHS staff, learning about their challenges and expressing gratitude for their service. These conversations weren't just ceremonial. Sophie asked detailed questions about resource needs, staff well-being, and the long-term impact of the pandemic on healthcare services. One particularly moving virtual engagement involved Sophie speaking with healthcare workers who were caring for COVID patients while worrying about their own family safety. She listened to stories of exhaustion, fear, and incredible dedication, offering words of support and ensuring that their experiences were recorded and shared appropriately with government officials who could provide additional support. As restrictions began to ease, Sophie was among the first royals to resume in-person engagements, following strict safety protocols. Her early visits focused on supporting organizations that had been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, including charities serving vulnerable populations and small businesses struggling to survive. Sophie's visit to a food bank in London exemplified her approach during this period. The facility was serving 3 times as many families as before the pandemic, with volunteers working in challenging conditions to meet increased demand. Sophie spent hours talking with volunteers and clients, learning about how the pandemic had affected different communities and what support was most needed. During the visit, she met Sarah, a single mother who had never needed assistance before the pandemic, but found herself unemployed when her employer closed permanently. Sarah was embarrassed about needing help, but grateful for the support. Sophie spent considerable time talking with Sarah about her situation, offering encouragement, and connecting her with additional resources for job training and childcare support. The food bank visit also highlighted Sophie's ability to adapt royal protocols to new circumstances. She wore masks when required, maintained social distancing, and followed all safety guidelines while still managing to connect meaningfully with the people she met. Her flexibility and common-sense approach helped establish new models for royal engagement during the pandemic. Tragically, 2021 brought the death of Prince Philip, Sophie's father-in-law, and a significant influence on her royal service. Philip's passing was deeply felt by the entire royal family, but it also created immediate practical challenges as his numerous patronages and commitments needed to be redistributed among remaining working royals. Sophie took on several of Philip's former roles, particularly those related to military and Commonwealth organizations. This expansion of her responsibilities came at a time when the royal family was already stretched thin, but Sophie approached it with characteristic determination and thorough preparation. Her first major engagement in Philip's memory was attending the annual awards ceremony for the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, a program he had founded to encourage young people to challenge themselves through physical activity, skill development, and community service. Sophie had been involved with the program for years, but taking on Philip's former role as patron added new significance to her participation. At the award ceremony, Sophie spoke movingly about Philip's legacy and his belief in young people's potential. She met with dozens of award recipients, hearing about their achievements and how the program had influenced their development. Her genuine interest in their stories and her ability to connect their individual achievements to Philip's broader vision made the event both a fitting tribute and an inspiring celebration of youth achievement. The period following Philip's death also saw increased scrutiny of the royal family's finances, work patterns, and relevance to modern Britain. Sophie's response was characteristically practical. She increased her workload, diversified her activities to address contemporary concerns, and maintained her focus on substantive engagement rather than publicity. Sophie's work during this period included significant involvement in climate and environmental issues, recognizing that these concerns were increasingly important to the British public, particularly younger generations. She didn't claim to be an environmental expert, but she used her platform to highlight innovative solutions and support organizations working on sustainability challenges. One of her most impactful environmental engagements was a visit to a renewable energy project in Scotland that employed formerly unemployed workers from traditional industries. The project demonstrated how environmental progress could create economic opportunities, particularly in communities that have been affected by the decline of coal and manufacturing industries. Sophie spent a full day at the facility learning about wind turbine technology, meeting with engineers and technicians, and talking with community leaders about the project's local impact. Her questions were practical and informed, focusing on job creation, skills development, and long-term sustainability. The visit generated significant media coverage that highlighted both environmental innovation and economic development. Sophie's international work also evolved during this period, with increased focus on digital diplomacy and virtual engagement with overseas partners. Travel restrictions limited traditional diplomatic visits, but Sophie participated in numerous online conferences and meetings that maintained Britain's relationships with Commonwealth and other partner countries. A particularly significant virtual engagement involved Sophie participating in a Commonwealth conference on women's economic empowerment, with participants joining from over 30 countries. Despite the technological challenges of coordinating such a large international meeting, Sophie's contributions were substantial and well-received. During the conference, she shared insights from her years of work with women entrepreneurs and survivors of violence, while also learning from advocates working in different cultural and economic contexts. Her presentation focused on practical strategies for supporting women's economic participation, drawing on examples from her extensive experience with various organizations. The conference also featured breakout sessions where Sophie worked with smaller groups to develop specific recommendations for Commonwealth countries. Her ability to facilitate productive discussions and help diverse participants find common ground was particularly valuable in these sessions. As travel restrictions eased, Sophie resumed international travel with a focus on previously planned engagements that had been postponed due to the pandemic. Her first major overseas trip was to Estonia, where she represented the Queen at events marking the country's independence anniversary and highlighting bilateral cooperation between Britain and Estonia. The Estonia visit showcased Sophie's diplomatic skills and her ability to represent British interests while building genuine relationships with international partners. She met with government officials, business leaders, and civil society organizations, participating in discussions about technology cooperation, education partnerships, and cultural exchange. One highlight of the Estonia visit was Sophie's participation in a conference on digital innovation and women's participation in technology fields. Her engagement was substantive and well-informed, reflecting her understanding that technological advancement and gender equality were interconnected priorities for many countries. Sophie also visited Estonian organizations working on issues similar to those she supported in Britain, creating opportunities for learning and potential collaboration. These visits weren't just diplomatic courtesy calls. They resulted in ongoing partnerships and shared learning between British and Estonian organizations. The later years of this period saw Sophie taking on increased responsibilities as other senior royals reduced their activities or focused on specific areas. Her workload expanded significantly, but she maintained her standards for thorough preparation and meaningful engagement, refusing to simply increase the quantity of her activities without maintaining quality. Sophie's approach during this period reflected her maturity and confidence as a royal. She was no longer the newcomer learning the ropes. She was an experienced professional who could provide leadership and stability during uncertain times. Her judgment was trusted by other family members, government officials, and the organization she served. One of Sophie's most significant achievements during this period was her work to establish new partnerships between royal patronages and emerging social movements. She recognized that traditional charitable models needed to evolve to address contemporary challenges and involve younger, more diverse voices in problem-solving. This work involved Sophie in sometimes difficult conversations about privilege, representation, and social change. She approached these discussions with humility and genuine openness to learning, understanding that her role was to listen, support, and amplify rather than lead or direct. Sophie's ability to navigate these sensitive conversations while maintaining her effectiveness and the respect of diverse partners demonstrated her growth as a royal and her understanding of how traditional institutions could adapt to serve contemporary needs. Her approach became a model for other royals facing similar challenges. By the end of this period, Sophie had established herself as one of the most reliable and effective senior royals. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining her core values and commitments had served the monarchy well during a period of significant challenges and transitions. Sophie's work had touched thousands of lives across multiple continents, and her influence extended far beyond traditional royal activities. She had proven that the monarchy could remain relevant and valuable in the modern world, but only through genuine engagement, continuous learning, and authentic commitment to service. As Sophie approached her 60th birthday in January 2025, she had become one of the most respected and accomplished members of the British royal family. The woman who had entered royal life as a successful public relations professional had evolved into a seasoned diplomat, advocate, and leader whose influence extended far beyond traditional royal duties. The months leading up to Sophie's milestone birthday were marked by reflection on her extraordinary journey and anticipation of the continued contributions she would make in the years ahead. Media coverage of her approaching birthday highlighted not just her official achievements, but the personal qualities that had made her such an effective royal. Her genuine warmth, her ability to connect with people from all backgrounds, and her unwavering commitment to making a real difference in the lives of others. Sophie's approach to her 60th birthday celebration reflected her character and values. Rather than focusing on personal recognition, she used the milestone as an opportunity to highlight the causes and organizations she had supported throughout her royal career. The celebrations were designed to showcase the work of others rather than celebrate her own achievements. The main public celebration took place at Buckingham Palace, where Sophie hosted representatives from dozens of organizations she had supported over more than 2 decades of royal service. The guest list was carefully curated to include not just charity leaders and prominent figures, but also ordinary people whose lives have been touched by the programs and initiatives Sophie had championed. Among the guests was Maria, the domestic violence survivor Sophie had met at a Manchester refuge years earlier. Maria had used the support services Sophie had helped develop to rebuild her life, complete professional training, and establish her own small business helping other survivors. Her presence at the celebration represented thousands of women who had benefited from Sophie's advocacy and support. Also present was Rashida from Bangladesh, the microfinance entrepreneur Sophie had met during her international development work. Rashida's business had grown significantly, allowing her to employ other women in her community and send not only her daughter, but also several other village children to school. She traveled to London specifically for Sophie's celebration, bringing handmade textiles as gifts and representing the global impact of Sophie's international work. The celebration featured presentations about various initiatives Sophie had supported, but these weren't just ceremonial displays. They were working sessions where different organizations shared best practices, learned from each other's experiences, and developed plans for future collaboration. Sophie's gift to herself was creating opportunities for the organizations she cared about to strengthen their own networks and effectiveness. During the evening's formal program, Sophie delivered a speech that reflected her perspective on royal service and her hopes for the future. She spoke about the privilege of being able to support so many remarkable organizations and the inspiration she had drawn from meeting people who were working to solve society's most challenging problems. Over these past 25 years, Sophie said, I have learned that real change happens not through grand gestures or proclamations, but through the daily work of dedicated people who refuse to accept that problems are too big to solve. My role has been simply to shine a light on their work and to ensure that their voices are heard by those who can provide resources and support. Sophie's speech also acknowledged the challenges facing society and the continued need for innovative approaches to persistent problems. She spoke about climate change, inequality, violence against women, and other issues that required sustained effort and collaboration across all sectors of society. As I look toward the future, she continued, I am more committed than ever to using whatever influence I have to support those who are working for positive change. The problems we face are complex, but so is the network of dedicated people working to address them. My job is to help strengthen that network and ensure that good work is recognized and supported. The speech received widespread positive coverage, with commentators noting Sophie's characteristic humility and her focus on others rather than her own achievements. The tone and content were seen as representing the best of contemporary royal service, engaged, informed, and genuinely committed to making a difference. In the weeks following the celebration, Sophie embarked on a series of engagements designed to highlight different aspects of her work and to visit organizations she had supported over many years. These visits weren't just ceremonial returns to familiar places. They were working engagements focused on current challenges and future opportunities. One of the most significant visits was to a vocational training center that had been established with Sophie's support to provide skills training for young people leaving care. The center had grown from a small pilot program to a major initiative serving hundreds of young people each year, and its success had inspired similar programs in other parts of the country. During the visit, Sophie met with current students who were training in various trades and professions. She talked with them about their goals and challenges, and she was particularly interested in hearing about how the program could be improved or expanded. Her questions were practical and detailed, reflecting her understanding that sustainable success required constant evaluation and improvement. Sophie also met with graduates of the program who had established successful careers and were now mentoring current students. These conversations highlighted one of Sophie's key insights about effective charitable work: the importance of creating programs that not only help people in the short term, but also enabled them to help others in the future. Another significant engagement during this period was Sophie's visit to a new women's support center that combined services for domestic violence survivors with economic empowerment programs. The center represented an evolution in thinking about supporting women affected by violence, moving beyond immediate safety concerns to address long-term independence and empowerment. Sophie had been involved in planning the center from its earliest stages, working with experts and survivors to design programs that addressed the full range of needs women faced when leaving abusive relationships. The center offered not just temporary shelter, but also job training, childcare, legal assistance, and ongoing counseling support. During her visit, Sophie participated in a workshop for women who were starting small businesses with support from the center's microenterprise program. She listened to their business plans, offered encouragement, and connected them with potential mentors and customers for her extensive network of contacts. The visit also included a meeting with the center's staff, where Sophie discussed lessons learned from the first year of operation and ideas for improving and expanding services. Her contributions to these discussions reflected not just her royal platform, but also her deep knowledge of the issues and her understanding of what worked in practice. Sophie's international work continued to evolve during this period, with new partnerships and initiatives that reflected changing global priorities and emerging opportunities. Her experience and credibility in international development made her a valuable representative for British interests and values on the world stage. One particularly significant international engagement was Sophie's participation in a global conference on women's economic empowerment held in Rwanda. The conference brought together government officials, business leaders, and civil society organizations from around the world to share experiences and develop new strategies for supporting women's economic participation. Sophie's role at the conference went beyond ceremonial participation. She led working sessions on microfinance and small business development, drawing on her extensive experience visiting women's economic empowerment programs around the world. Her contributions were valued by other participants because they were based on practical knowledge rather than theoretical understanding. The conference also provided opportunities for Sophie to learn about new approaches and innovations in women's economic empowerment. She participated in sessions led by African women entrepreneurs, learning about mobile banking, cooperative business models, and other strategies that had proven successful in different contexts. During the Rwanda visit, Sophie also traveled to rural areas to visit women's cooperatives and small businesses. These visits reinforced her understanding that successful development programs needed to be based on local knowledge and leadership rather than external assumptions about what communities needed. Back in Britain, Sophie continued to adapt her approach to address emerging social challenges. The ongoing effects of the COVID pandemic had created new needs and exacerbated existing problems, particularly affecting vulnerable populations that Sophie had worked with for years. Sophie's response included increased support for mental health services, recognizing that isolation, economic stress, and health concerns that affected many people's psychological well-being. She visited community mental health programs, talked with counselors and clients about their experiences, and advocated for increased resources for mental health support. One particularly impactful visit was to a program serving military families dealing with mental health challenges related to deployment, injury, and transition to civilian life. Sophie had worked with military families for years, but the pandemic had created additional stresses that required new approaches to support. During the visit, Sophie participated in a support group meeting for military spouses, listening to their concerns and learning about how existing support programs could be improved. The conversation was honest and sometimes difficult, but Sophie's genuine concern and practical approach helped create an atmosphere where participants felt comfortable sharing their real experiences. As Sophie settled into her 60th year, her role within the royal family continued to evolve. With other senior royals reducing their activities or focusing on specific areas, Sophie found herself taking on additional responsibilities while maintaining her existing commitments. This expansion of responsibilities required Sophie to become even more strategic about her time and energy. She worked with her staff to identify areas where her involvement could have maximum impact and to ensure that her various activities reinforced rather than competed with each other. Sophie's approach to managing increased responsibilities reflected her professional background and her understanding of effective leadership. She delegated appropriate tasks to qualified staff, collaborated with other royals to avoid duplication of effort, and maintained focus on outcomes rather than just activities. One of Sophie's most important contributions during this period was her mentoring of younger royals who were beginning to take on official duties. Her experience navigating the transition from private citizen to working royal made her a valuable advisor for family members facing similar challenges. Sophie's mentoring approach was characteristically practical and supportive. She shared lessons learned from her own experience while encouraging younger royals to develop their own approaches based on their interests and strengths. She understood that effective royal service required authenticity and personal commitment rather than simply following established patterns. The relationship between Sophie's personal life and her public duties also continued to evolve as her children grew into adulthood. Louise and James have been raised with an understanding of their family's public role, but also with strong personal values and a sense of responsibility to others. Sophie's influence on her children was evident in their choices and attitudes as they became adults. Both had inherited their mother's genuine concern for others and her practical approach to addressing problems. They understood that their privileged position came with obligations to serve others, but they also had their own interests and aspirations. As Sophie looked toward the future, she remained committed to the causes and organizations she had supported for decades while also staying open to new opportunities and challenges. Her approach was characterized by continuity and innovation, maintaining proven effective programs while adapting to changing needs and circumstances. Sophie's legacy at 60 was already substantial and multifaceted. She had influenced policy and practice in areas ranging from domestic violence prevention to international development. She had supported thousands of individuals through crisis and transition. She had helped strengthen civil society organizations and build partnerships across sectors and borders. Most importantly, Sophie had demonstrated that traditional institutions like the monarchy could remain relevant and valuable in the modern world through genuine engagement, continuous learning, and authentic commitment to service. Her example had influenced not just other royals but leaders in business, politics, and civil society who had observed her approach to leadership and service. As she celebrated her 60th birthday, Sophie remained focused on the future rather than the past. She understood that the challenges facing society were evolving and that effective responses required continued innovation and collaboration. Her role was to support those doing the actual work of solving problems while using her platform to ensure that good work received the recognition and resources it deserved. Sophie's grace at 60 was not just about maintaining dignity and composure, though she certainly possessed those qualities. It was about the wisdom that came from decades of listening to people from all walks of life, the strength that came from facing challenges with integrity and determination, and the hope that came from seeing what was possible when people worked together for positive change. The woman who had once been a successful public relations professional had become something far more significant, a leader whose influence extended around the world and whose legacy would continue to benefit others long after her official duties ended. At 60, Sophie remained committed to serving others with the same grace, intelligence, and authentic concern that had characterized her entire royal career.